One of the guys that's always been on the front edge of NIL, all of these things that everybody is so confused about, is now in studio with us, a longtime friend. I've known this guy 15 years. We all have. Jim Cavale, athletes.org. We had the conversation earlier this week about Nico, and you brought up the transfer portal. And you said there's not really a window when it comes to the transfer portal. It literally is 365 days a year. What did you actually mean by that? Because Brown was talking about, I think there's only 4 more days left in the college basketball.
That's in the basketball one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is the NCAA has clarified the fact that you can technically unenroll and enroll anytime you want. And Xavier Lucas and the situation at Wisconsin earlier this year proved that. So while there are some transfer rules out there, they're very unenforceable. And that really is a microcosm of the bigger picture of not just college football, but college sports, which is there are no rules. And until there are rules and rules that can be enforced, you can expect a continuance of the chaos you're seeing, whether it's Nico or the 10 things that are going to happen next week, because there's no rules. So that's really what fans and everyone needs to understand. And we all know we need to have rules and structure in college athletics, and they need to be rules that can be enforced for this thing to kind of come back to reality.
Well, let's start with, and as Lance said, we've all known Jim forever. Let's start with what the organization you work for does, athletes.org. You're the founder of it. What are you guys doing for the athletes?
Well, I think an important part of telling the athletes.org story is talking about the previous decade of work I did in college athletics. And I built a software company called Influencer. We started in 2017 with Coach Calipari in Kentucky basketball, and we grew pretty fast in the first 2 years. 3,000 college and pro teams used our software to help their athletes on social media. And a big reason that I built the company and left Iron Tribe, Lance used to work out at my gyms. I used to be president over at Iron Tribe and doing that. I left Iron Tribe and sold to be able to build Influencer because I felt strongly from the Ed O'Bannon case that NIL was not a matter of if but when. I just didn't know when it was going to happen. So my thesis was, let's build a great software company that helps athletes on social. Let's get every college and pro team to be a client. And when NIL happens, we'll be in a position to help with that too. You fast forward to 2021, NIL happens. We sold the company to Teamworks. I stayed on board as CEO, and we built payments and reporting software for most of the major colleges. So in the first year NIL, we ran about $350 million of NIL activity through our software. And I could see what was happening. And a lot of my friends in college athletics, ADs and commissioners would say, hey, can you come present what's happening with NIL at our conference meeting or at our national meeting? And I would. And here's what happened in the first year. 90% of the $350 million was money being laundered by donors through a shell company called a collective to pay players to play at your school. And I know you don't like the words pay and play in the same sentence, athletic directors and commissioners, but that's what NIL is being used for. And the reason we're here in this chaotic, unstructured environment with NIL is because Ed O'Bannon beat you in court a decade ago and you didn't do anything to get in front of it. If you would have relinquished some rules, maybe we wouldn't be here. You know, if Kyle Guy could have shared his wedding registry without getting in trouble, or whatever example you want to use, right? So here we are in 2022, and this is what's happening. And during 2022, while that was happening, there was new court cases. House, Carter, Hubbard versus the NCAA. And they were all about the school paying the athlete directly instead of donors funding athlete pay through a collective. And so I would really push for, hey, we got to figure this out. And there was a push back on figuring anything out. And that's why I stepped down as CEO and started athletes.org, which is the Players Association for college athletes. Just like you have the NFLPA or NBPA for those leagues, there's a need for players to have an association in college because it's the only way you can set rules. You have to collectively bargain transfer rules, free agency, compensation rules, health and safety with the schools. And then all the rules can be enforced and there's no more lawsuits because you have protections. And so that's really what we're building. We have 4,200 athletes across mostly power conference schools, mostly football and basketball. And it's free membership. And when they sign up, we educate them on their rights. We also educate them on the business of college sports. We gather them in person at the CFP. We had 50 power conference schools represented with football players who met about these things for 2 days. And, we're really hoping that at some point the schools do what the other multi-billion-dollar sports and entertainment businesses do and they collectively bargain with their talent because that's going to allow structure to come to college athletics.
The free membership, is that why you stay away from using players union there, because it's free so anybody can join? You don't have to use the word union there, and also the collective bargaining, that shuts down the lawsuits, right? Once you have a collective bargaining agreement, then everybody can't keep running to court and saying, well, you can't enforce that, you can't enforce that.
Correct. So the big thing is we're a trade association at this point because athletes aren't employees.
Right.
If athletes were employees, we'd be a 501c6 union. Instead, we're a 501c4 trade association. We look similar and are structured similar to the Screen Actors Guild, who represents actors and writers that are contractors.
He's a member.
And I know. He spent some time out there.
He was a member at one point, right?
Out of high school.
I tried to become a member. Got to have some talent.
So, ultimately, we are not out advocating for employment. Employment is a fear of college athletics leaders because it would be turning the business model they have upside down. They'd have to pay payroll taxes, workers' comp, minimum wage. It'd be an 8-figure a year additional expense to the universities in addition to what they're paying the players, which is another 8 figures a year. So they're very, very fearful of employment. So what we've said is, hey, there are ways to collectively bargain with contractors. And we're building a trade association that could help you do that. And so we have tried to build a bridge. We represent the athletes, but a lot of my friends and former friends are leading college athletic programs or conferences, and we're trying to say, hey, there's a bridge here, and there's a way to do this, and that's how we've approached it, and that's why we're not a union, and it's free because we're not collectively bargaining right now for the athletes. Now, when we do, will we charge member dues? Yeah, of course. I mean, we have to build a business, but right now, we're investing millions a year into an operation that is further along than any association in history in college athletics in actually organizing the athletes so we can do this.
Well, the way you worded that is some former friends. Look, this seems to be inevitable, that there's going to be another side and there's going to be a union like athletes.org. When you come across commissioners and chancellors, what is their pushback to you? Why would they not say, hey, look, this is inevitable. This is good for the athletes, that they've got this on their side. We can find common ground.
Yeah, it's a very polarizing topic, even outside of sports. Unionization is, right? Like, we're in Alabama. We already know about the UAW disputes that have happened here with the United Auto Workers Union, right? Right-to-work states, which most of the southern states are anti-unionization in a lot of ways and have laws that don't allow it. And so who does the president work for at a public institution? They work for the governor, basically. And so it's a very polarizing topic that at the presidential level and at the state government level can be looked at as, no, we're not doing anything with unionization. The problem is the analogy in their head that they're using is the UAW. The analogy in their head they should be using is the NFLPA, who has a partnership that's not adversarial. The players, the NFLPA, and the NFL have a partnership in the greatest business in sports. And so we need more of the leaders at the presidential level of the school and the state government level to understand that unionization in sports is a great thing, especially for a multi-billion-dollar sports and entertainment business, which they're a part of, and it's a solution. And so when you go down into the commissioner and AD level, you have to have a little bit of empathy for them because they don't really make decisions on their own. Who does the commissioner of a conference report to? The presidents of the school. The commissioner of a conference can't just make decisions on his or her own. They report to the presidents. So we do need commissioners and ADs to step up. Somebody's got to lead, right? Leadership is hard. It takes conviction in your own beliefs. It takes a willingness to cast a vision that may get a lot of pushback, but also a belief in that vision to pursue it all the way to the end. We saw this in 2020. Greg Sankey made sure that he stuck to the vision of playing out that football season and didn't react when the Big Ten and the Pac-12, God rest its soul, we're saying, no, myocarditis, and our doctors said this and whatever. And Commissioner Sankey, in my opinion, did the best leadership that's ever been done in college athletics history because it saved the football season. He stuck to his vision with conviction, right? We need leaders to do that with this. We need people to be okay talking about what collective bargaining looks like, whether it's in private or public, and we need a leader to step up and show the industry what it could look like to follow that vision.
What's their biggest fear? Is it a strike or a holdout? Because when you hear the Players Association, we've had strikes before in the NFL, even though there's a partnership. It happens in Major League Baseball. We got one that's probably going to happen soon, maybe in both of those sports. Is that a fear from college leaders? Because it does seem to me like there are strikes and holdouts individually happening on a daily basis with college athletes right now.
Oh, yeah.
Are they fearful that it's just one big group that does it at one time? I don't know what the biggest fear is for them.
Yeah, I think there's a fear of if an organization representing all of the athletes as a group could not only disrupt labor and a strike could happen, but there's also now an ability to file grievances, and it increases accountability, which lessens the power of the actual schools and college athletics departments. However, by giving up a little bit of power and working together with their athletes, they gain this greater protection. And it's going to end up being a trade at some point. There's going to be a compromise. Right now, there's only two ways that you can set rules and not get sued, okay? You either get Congress to bail you out with an antitrust exemption that allows you to do that, and that's what they're trying to do right now through Ted Cruz, and they're not going to get it. I mean, is anything really going to pass right now in Congress? It could be a bill for world peace from the Republicans. 7 Democrats on the Senate ain't voting for it. So Congress bailing them out is choice one. Choice two is collective bargaining. That's it. Those are the only two ways, fans, that rules can be set, that transfer rules can be set, and commitment can be restored in college athletics, and minimum salaries and salary caps can take place, and all the things. You have to have one of those two things happen. And so I think there's a fear, as I said earlier, of employment happening, which is one big fear. Another fear is it's giving up a little bit of power and doing things collaboratively with the athletes instead of on an island. And I think the political fear of what's my governor going to say? You know, how's my president going to feel about this? But at some point, something's got to give. And I think this Nico situation is foreshadowing many, many more like it.
Jim Cavale is with us in studio, athletes.org, athletes.org. We'll talk more with Jim in a moment. I want to remind everyone that NASCAR is coming back to the Talladega Superspeedway. TalladagaSuperspeedway.com for the Jack Links 500 weekend, April 25th through 27th. You can go see the intensity of Talladega for yourself. If you've never done this, you really, really should. It is a blast. April 25th through 27th. Reserve your spot for the Jack Links 500 weekend, TalladagaSuperspeedway.com, TalladagaSuperspeedway.com. Jim, I've been told, now granted, this was by someone in college athletics, so you know his priority is his athletic department, his school, and his players, that one of the biggest issues in NIL right now is many of the agents that are operating are not NFLPA approved agents. So they've got a 3-year window to make their money off players. And most of the time, the players are coming into this uneducated. They're new to this territory, so they agree to anything because they see dollar signs. And agents are running amok because of this.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think what's so sad is, you know, we've built a lot of technology for the athletes through their member app to be able to run background checks on agents, along with getting free legal, free accounting, taking polls and surveys on key issues. And this agent thing comes up a lot. You know, there's a need for agents to have to go through a certification to be an agent for a college athlete. There's a need for fees to be regulated on what an agent can charge. There's a whole set of regulations that we could actually bring right now. And we would love to bring right now because we've built it. But unfortunately, until you have a players association, you can't regulate agents. Right. It's another reason why there should be a players association certified and recognized by the schools. And it's one of many. Another thing, we haven't gotten into it yet, is the settlement that's happening, right? The House settlement. There was a hearing last week to have it approved. It wasn't approved in the hearing, but it should be approved probably in the next couple weeks. And that's what's going to allow revenue sharing to start from the schools to the athletes. That's the $20 million per school cap you may have heard about. And there are going to be so many new problems from this settlement.
Great.
Okay. First of all, last week during a hearing for 7 hours, people objected. And it was athletes coming up objecting about the fact that there's Title IX violations because all the money is really going to go to football and men's basketball. There was athletes who objected around the roster limitations because now you only have a certain amount of roster spots per sport, and essentially you're going to have thousands of spots gone from D1. And there was athletes complaining about that. There was athletes complaining around the contracts that the schools are putting in front of the athletes. These are all issues that will be new lawsuits, and they won't be against the NCAA anymore. The lawsuits are now coming directly to the school. The school takes on all the liability because who's the athlete signing a contract now with? The school. There's no more NCAA national letter of intent. It's gone. When you sign to be an athlete, you're signing with Auburn. You're signing with Alabama. And you're signing a scholarship agreement. And then if you're good enough or play a sport that produces revenue, you're signing a revenue sharing agreement. And so there's going to be a ton of new issues from the House settlement that, once again, exposes the fact that the only real solution is collective bargaining.
Let me ask you this. Is unlimited eligibility on the table?
Yes. All of it is.
I mean, are you for that, though? If you're a guy like Diego Pavia that we've talked about, a Vanderbilt quarterback who will never play in the NFL, but if he could play till he's 35 at Vanderbilt and make $1 million a year, is that a good thing for college athletics?
I had lunch with Diego Tuesday. He'd disagree with you on that.
Yeah, I'm sure he does.
Yeah. So
reality will hit hard.
So listen. It really doesn't matter what I'm for or against. It matters what the athletes are for or against, right? That being said, whether it's eligibility, whether it's academic standards, whether it's staying at a school for a certain amount of years, those things are all possible if you have collective bargaining. So if you want to cap eligibility based on age, based on a window of years, you get to play out your eligibility, whatever it is, you have to agree to it with the athletes. And believe it or not, a lot of these things, the athletes in the schools are very close. They're much athletes want transfer rules. They want continuity in their programs. Also, athletes want transfer rules because you know who the majority of the 4,000 athletes are in the transfer portal right now, fans? You know who they are? They're athletes who have been told by their coach, you'll never play a down at this school ever. That's who's in the portal. 10% of the portal is athletes testing the market for money. 90% of the portal is coaches using the portal to release spots and open them up for other athletes they can go get. So athletes want transfer rules. I think athletes would agree to eligibility rules. Athletes would agree to academic standards, right? But the only way that you can do is you got to get everybody in a room. And by the way, I don't just talk to athletes. I talk to leaders. I'm in rooms privately at this point, for the most part, with ADs, with commissioners, talking about all this because they're now looking at, man, we need to think about collective bargaining. That might be our only option. I have an SEC AD who's told me that 12 of the 16 SEC ADs want collective bargaining, right? So it is a growing desire. It's just how you get there and what risk is it to you as an AD when your president might have politics that are pressured from the state government?
For your organization, like how many members will you have if we get to that? Like, will you have a football only part, a men's basketball? Will it be broken down that way? Because when it comes to voting, if I'm a an SEC football player, do I really want water polo at Stanford having the same vote I do?
Yep, it's a great question. So when we built out our structure, our legal counsel is led by Jim Quinn, who's won every major case for the players against the leagues over the last 40 years. MLB free agency, NFL free agency, 93, that's Jim Quinn. And so Jim, and then our board, which has former coaches like Jim Boeheim, former ADs like Sandy Barber of Penn State, but also MBPA, NFLPA. We all thought through this together, and we have chapters within athletes.org based on your sport and conference. And the real answer to your question will be a result of who wants to bargain with the athletes, because I don't think it's going to be every school. But if it was the 4 power conferences using this new entity they just launched that's going to do enforcement for the House settlement,
right?
They would all join an entity that's going to bargain with the players. The players wouldn't be bargaining directly with each school. The Atlanta Falcons players don't bargain with the Atlanta Falcons. They bargain with the NFL. It would be an entity that all of the schools who are going to bargain are a part of, and then that entity would negotiate with the athletes. And there would be issues that would be athletic department wide, such as scholarships, benefits, existence of a sport, travel for that sport, health and safety benefits. Those would apply to all athletes. How the revenue sharing is distributed. You got to, I think, get female athletes to agree to the male athletes that play football getting the majority, because then they'll understand their sport will still exist, right? So it's department-wide issues all the athletes vote on, but then there's football-only issues like concussion protocol or minimum salary or veterans bonus pool that motivates players to stay and not feel like some 5-star hotshot's going to take money from them by staying. All that stuff is football only, and the football chapter of players deals with that. So that's how we're built, and that's how it will go down. It's not, ADs, if you're listening, like it's not athletes negotiating with your school. That's not what this is.
So Cliff Notes on Nico, going back to him. He goes to a college football playoff last year. It looked like he was going to be the starter for a team that was in the mix to go back to a college football playoff and win double-digit games, make $2.5 million. Now they do this power play, and he might land at UCLA, a team that was 5-7 for less money. You are a guy that has dealt with a lot of these different scenarios. Your speculation on what happened with Nico and what went wrong?
Well, you get mixed information. I've talked to people close to the family, people who are prominent agents that don't officially represent him, but have had conversations with the family in an ongoing manner. And you hear that he didn't feel like the offense fit him, and he was looking maybe to see if some tweaks could be made. You obviously hear the compensation aspect and that he thought he could get more money. Ultimately, it's a disadvantage when you just have your father working on this and you don't have really one of the big agencies. Because what the big agencies can bring to this, what a Wasserman or a CAA can bring to this, is they can survey the market to really understand what your value is, to know you can go get it and use it as leverage to go get more from the school you're at. He didn't have that because it's his dad working on it. And so I think that created a conversation that started back in November of last year, all the way to this tipping point that happened last week where he decided he wanted to leave. But I think there was more to it than just money. I think it did have to do with the offense, and I think it's a disadvantage to not have a big agency when you're that big of a quarterback.
When you have the individual conference rules like the SEC, like Nico can't go into the SEC,
yep.
That's going to be challenged, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, like the reality is that rule is an example of many of the other rules that just can't be enforced. Now, maybe the SEC would enforce it, and if they did, it would be the option of the athlete to sue. But yes, it's another example of an exposure that the conference in this case would have.
Yeah, fascinating.
But it seems like every decision that is made now can be challenged.
Yeah, I mean, anything can be challenged.
And the only other thing I wanted to ask you about was July 1st. I mean, because, we talk to different NILs, and they're like, we got to kind of tap the brakes because we don't know what's going to go down July 1st. So, like, in a nutshell, the cliff notes of that, what are we looking at? What ultimately happens?
Yeah,
with
so
July
the House
1st?
settlement.
More chaos.
The House settlement, it is more chaos. The House settlement goes live, $20 million cap per school. It's pay for play disguised as NIL, unfortunately. So the contracts are going to say, hey, you do appearances for the school and you can't do NIL deals with these brands and stuff like that. But the coach is selling the athlete on, come here for $300,000 and play quarterback or whatever position. And so when the athlete doesn't maybe play well or pan out and the coach wants to replace that athlete, it's going to be really hard because it's not a performance contract with a base salary and then a bonus for playing a certain amount of plays and then a bonus for taking you to the CFP like NFL deals are structured. So basically it'd be like the Chiefs doing a State Farm type deal with Patrick Mahomes instead of a quarterback deal with Patrick Mahomes, right? And so that's how these deals will be structured. And the reason that's a problem is because there's going to be a lot of confused athletes when things don't work out and schools want to get out of a deal. And also athletes, when they play well, will go to the school and try to leverage it to get more and more and more. And there's only enough. And so that's the $20 million. Outside of the $20 million would be NIL deals that are real NIL deals. And there's a clearinghouse that's been created. And I mentioned this entity's been started. It's a private entity that the 4 power conferences are a part of. It has 10 board members that are all ADs. Guys like Ross Bjork at Ohio State is on that board. And they're using Deloitte to force every athlete that does an NIL deal outside of the $20 million of $600 or more to report the transaction. And then they'll evaluate if it's fair market value or not. Now, can you imagine a deal going through there and they say, that's not fair market value? That'd be like me saying you got to sign up for a clearinghouse to sell your home. That's right. And if somebody wants to pay you over a certain amount and we don't think it's fair market value, you can't do it, right? It's not going to work. It's going to be more lawsuits. And so...
Yeah, fair market value is what you can get.
Exactly.
Right.
It's
Fair market
America.
value.
And that exposes really the problem in college athletics. You should read, Walter Byer's book, right? He led the NCAA and created this whole amateurism model. And then he got some conviction in his soul after he was done and wrote a whole book basically defeating everything he had done because... this special status of college sports doesn't fit with America. Listen to that example and think about it if you're a fan when you want to sell your home. And so what's going to happen is a lot of people just skirt around the system and not report, and collectives will try to still do deals on top of the $20 million to get over the cap. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they plan to regulate that. And of course, schools that have means with donors are going to really use that as the icing on the cake on top of the $20 million. And it's going to become a huge issue. And so what collectives are doing, and this is why you're seeing these deals inflate above maybe what market value is collectives are saying, just in case this does get regulated on July 1st, we're going to do a ton of collective deals until then. And we're going to just front load deals after deal. And they're doing it with basketball especially, right?
Yeah.
And then July 1st, we'll do the revenue sharing. And so basically you're going to have like twice as much money going to the athletes this year because of that. And then it's going to be interesting a year later to see if they still get the same amount of money for their individual deals. It's also going to be interesting for the 70 or so schools that fully fund $20 million. All of them are going to have to get the money from the university or donors because all of them spend all their money already. So imagine you're at Iowa State and you raise $20 million or the university gives it to you and you lose. You go 5-7 and you lose again. You go 4-8. At some point, are they going to say like, is this getting ROI? Are we going to keep doing the 20 million? Yeah, we're going to get there. So this is all a house of cards, just like it's been. I mean, we got an SEC coach who makes $13 million calling donors, asking for millions of dollars to get players so he can get a new contract.
Yeah. And the donors are tired.
They're tired.
Yeah.
They're tired.
Oh, there's no doubt they're tired.
They're tired of being called for money. Nobody's building new stuff anymore, though. That's at least a good thing.
That is. Bad for construction companies. They were cashing in.
The weight room that was 2 years old is going to have to hold on for another year.
All right, he is Jim Cavale. Athletes.org is the organization. Athletes.org. You can follow them on social media. It's linked right there in our social media at Jim Cavale as well. Thank you, Jim. Always good to see you, buddy.
Fascinating.
Appreciate you
Great
guys.
stuff.
Thanks for having me.